on a Wednesday, middle of the week, and it feels like another Monday. No, I'm just kidding. It may feel like that to you. I don't know. It has been an interesting week, uh, to say the least. Having a little issue here for some reason on Facebook Live, but I'm trying to correct it right now. Um, hope that you are having a good week. I hope that things are going okay for you. We're going to talk about prayer concerns in just a minute, and we're going to have probably a more shortened type of whatever you want to call this, Bible study, sermonette, any number of possibilities, I suppose. We finished up with the 7 deadly sins last week, and we're getting ready to launch the Reshape this Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock um, in the Fellowship Hall with Mark Tidsworth. And I am looking forward to that. We have, well, let me check my list again. We have 52 people who have committed to being here Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock. So I'm grateful for them, and I'm grateful for you. And we will talk a little bit later about possibilities for you joining us in our journey together over the course of 8 weeks, beginning the week of, well, I think for the Wednesday crowd, it may be the beginning of the week of September 8th, but I'll check with that. But we'll give you information about those kinds of things. So why Reshape? Why are we doing these things right now? Well, I was introduced a long time ago to a classic verse in Proverbs 29 in verse 18. The first part of that verse in the King James Version speaks volumes. In other translations, it maybe is King James is maybe not as accurate as it ought to be in the Hebrew, but just that phrase is worthwhile. The phrase of where there is no vision, the people perish. Vision is what makes us get up in the morning. If we don't have a vision or an idea of who we are and what we're going to do today and how that fits into the scheme of both my life and other people's lives, and most of all, how that fits into God's planning for our lives, it's hard to get out of bed. It's hard to show up when you do go somewhere. Well, Reshape is about showing back up. It's about recognizing that it's time sometimes to step back and reevaluate and organically come up with vision and new purpose and reshaping our eyes once more. I had long said to people, one of the great sermons you can preach on Christmastide is the sermon about the wise men or the magi coming. And I think it's a great sermon in itself, the story, because we imagine the star, and we imagine the star always being there, and we imagine that it shines so bright that it's hard for, why didn't other people see the star to follow it in the way these magi did? Well, the truth of the matter is they come from a distant land. When it was daylight, I doubt they could see the star. And what's more, I doubt every night was cloudless with a perfect view of the heavenly host of stars. So, they had to make their way sometimes when there was no star to guide them. No way to get a bearing and reading on direction. So when they would travel without having glimpsed or seen the star for a while, and then they would come across the sky being open and clear and being able to see it once again, they could correct their course and redirect it where it needed to go and where they needed to be to get to the star. Isn't that kind of like life? I think so. Sometimes the skies are clear and the stars are perfectly bright, and we have an absolute clear understanding with ourselves and with God as to who we are and where we are going. And that shall drive us, even if we go through a week of rain, a week of cloudy skies and low visibility. That's what Reshape's for. That's what Reshape is about. I read years ago uh, Bob Dale's wonderful, powerful book entitled um, How to Dream Again. And it was about church and churches dreaming a vision for themselves. We used it here back in 2002 when we began to look to cast new vision for our direction at Chatham Heights Baptist Church. We spent about a year diving in as a team, a committee, to look and read books and then come together and then talk with all of you, and then came out with some vision and some goals, many of which still exist today. But as all things, you have to retweak and retouch the picture. In that book, How to Dream Again, uh, Bob Dale began with an interesting chapter. He gave some vignettes, little short stories of different churches. Whether these churches existed or not as they were named, I doubt it, but they probably existed as real churches to us, and we would probably put in a name somewhere. For example, he talked about the one church where the pastor was excited and the 500-seat sanctuary was full practically every Sunday. And he thought, this is great, we're doing wonderful. And then he ran across a couple of leaders and deacons who he overheard the conversation. And they said, we have finally done it. We have arrived. We have filled the sanctuary. Thank God we can cruise now. Well, the pastor had one vision for the future of the church, and some of the leadership had a different vision. All they wanted to do was fill the sanctuary and then release it, let it go. Another vignette that he talked about was the guy who was a director of missions in a collection of Baptists in the area who just arrived, and First Church of the city had offered him office space. Well, First Church and Second Church had nothing to do with each other. Second Church is split off a century before or decades before. And when they found out that he was going to have his office at First Church, they withdrew from the association because their vision for the church was that as Second Church, they would not have anything to do with First Church. They dreamed of a world without them. And he talked about some others. There are all types of visions that people have for the church. Maybe your vision is they're finally playing music I like, and that's all I need, so I'm good. Or they're finally, filling some pews, and that's all we need to know about, and I'm good. Or I know you've got to deal with some of these issues, but deal with them after I'm gone. Well, that's a vision. It may not be a good one, it may not even be the right one, but it's a vision. After 2019 and 2020, and here we are in 2021, and I'm not sure it's a whole lot better. We need a reshape. We need a reshape for ourselves and our church. We have suffered a lot of loss, as a lot of other churches have. And you can say all you want. Well, this church didn't lose anything. I'm not concerned about that. I've been called to be the pastor of this church and partner with other churches. And, you know, we all have taken, quote, hits, I guess you would call it. And we're not going to discuss the whys and wherefores. What I do want us to know is that where do we go from here? What is our mission? What is our ministry? You know, mission should feed ministry. Have we had the right mission? Have we had the right vision? Sometimes vision takes a while. It takes a step or two. When I was at North Pamunkey, I had a vision. I thought was a doable and practical and important piece to the future of that church. And sometimes visions are tangible, and sometimes they're about attitudes, and sometimes they're about unseen ministries. But in this case, it was tangible. It was a building. We had very, very tiny fellowship space. Very tiny. It was you can understand the church was the building that housed this church that was founded in 1774. This building was sanctuary was built in 1830 or 40. It was brick. It still had the original slave balcony. And it stayed that way until the 1950s. And in the late 1950s, they built a wing behind it and onto it that you would call an education wing. It consisted of a basement area, which became a fellowship area of very small proportions. And upstairs was, on the main level, was a series of rooms for classes and a couple of indoor bathrooms, which they did not have until then. And then an upstairs with more classrooms and a baptistry. Well, after I'd been there for about 5 years or so, I kind of saw the need. When we had homecoming and we had the biggest crowds, of course, naturally, that we'd have all year, we prayed for no weather because we could have it outside. But if there was weather, we couldn't. And so I began to think about a vision. I remembered hearing stories in the 50s of those who were there, of how they built that educational part of the building. They didn't just hire somebody to do it. They did it. They had the talent within their church. And they went to an old brick house on the Zachary Taylor farm. Yes, that Zachary Taylor, President Zachary Taylor. At that time, his granddaughter was very much alive. And they went and asked her. There was this old brick house that was not being used and was going to be torn down anyway, and asked if they could tear it down, clean up the brick, and use it. And she gladly agreed. And so that's what they did for that project. They took and recycled the brick, with the women cleaning it up, chiseling off the cement, and then the men working and building the frame and adding the brick and bricking and macing it out. It brought the church together in a way that, just was powerfully dynamic for them. Well, what I looked at was a need for a new building with a purpose of being multi-purpose. And didn't have to be humongous, just enough for our benefit and our uses. And then I felt like there was a spiritual aspect of uniting the church, and then perhaps, doing community events out of it. So I proposed this vision after I'd fleshed it out with the deacons, and I told them about it. And I said, I also had seen financially that I felt like now was a good time. We had probably 4 or 5 people who I believe fiscally could handle the vast majority of the funding without, you know, damaging themselves financially. And yet, deacons kind of saw it, and then we took it to kind of a Wednesday night and hashed it out and talked about it and took a straw vote. And the straw vote was 66% agreed there was a need and 34% agreed there or felt there wasn't. And basically, I said, well, we don't need to do this then, because if we're not vastly majority wise on board, we don't need to jump into this. So we didn't. Shelved the idea. Patiently waited. About 2.5 years later, one of our grand old men of the church passed away. He had a substantial uh, fortune of his own, and um, he'd always historically done anything for the church that the church needed, or to keep them out of debt, or to keep, to do whatever was needed. But by the time he had passed away, he didn't see the church in that great of a need, and the result was he left the church $5,000, and he left the cemetery fund about $20,000, and the nieces and nephews multiples, and his sister-in-law, who had taken care of him and his brother and his wife all these years, tithed $20,000 of her inheritance of him. So, or was 25. Either way, so that gives you a picture. So I had leadership say, look, why don't we get a picnic shelter? Why don't we do, there's a great picnic shelter down the road at the other church with a fireplace. And I said, well, that's great. We can have a bang up one. It'd be great for 6 or 7 months out of the year. What do you do with the other months? We could use some education space. We could use some fellowship space. And they started thinking about what we talked about before. And I said, look, you've already got 25, 30,000 without asking for a dollar. And the long and short of it was that we then planned out a vision. And we built on a vision. And we did most of the work ourselves. We had a wonderful young up-and-coming architect who made the sketches for us that architecturally tied it into the old building, into the facade of it. And yet it stood separate right beside the current buildings, because to tie it on meant we would have to bring the rest of the old building up to codes, and we just couldn't afford to do that. And we worked on it. Only things that we ended up um, having to contract for were the HVAC and the brick masonry. And even in the brick masonry, the best mason in the county overbid everybody, and then came up to me one day before we'd ever selected a bid. But I'd already knew he had overbid everybody. Not under, over. He said to me, I didn't think I did my best on my bid. Can I give another one? I said, well, we haven't decided yet, so I'm not going to tell you anything, but if you want to, fine. So he submitted a new bid, and in that bid, he underbid everybody. Now, this was the best brick mason around. And I think his wife jumped on him because she wasn't a part of our church, but she was connected to so much of our church. And his excuse was he wanted to have his work seen in that part of the county. I say all that to simply say it all worked out. For those who were worried we'd go into debt, we didn't. We literally paid for it as we went and had some monies left over. The church, people that were worried about paying for a new building and funding the budget, guess what? We had the highest receipts ever in the history of that church the same year we built the building. And I'm not talking about the highest receipts including building fund. I'm talking about the highest receipts for the general fund. Vision has to be patient. It has to work in us, on us, and among us. And that's what we're looking to do with Reshape, because it's important. God is never through with us as much as we may be through with ourselves or even God. Last Sunday, Becky McKinney spoke about Reshape in our two services. You can find the services on our page here or over on our website or YouTube channel. And she did a great job. She reminded me of a text in Jeremiah 29, one in which we had a banner that used to hang in the fellowship hall that quoted a piece of it. Where God says, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans for good and not for evil." And we always look at that as, well, yeah, God always has something good. Well, you got to understand, Jeremiah says that in the midst of the Babylonian incursion and siege on Jerusalem where he lived. And the last thing that things looked like was hopeful. And yet there was God promising through his prophet Jeremiah, "I've got big plans for you. And these plans are for good, not for bad, not for evil." And it would be hard to do that because not too long after that, the Babylonians knock the gates down and they come in and they lay waste to everything around them, including Solomon's temple. And they cart off the best and the brightest of Israel, or excuse me, in that case it was Judah, of Judah and Jerusalem, back to a foreign country in Babylon. And there was no clear idea that there would be any kind of future. And yet somehow these words of Jeremiah stayed with them, even in a foreign land of very unknown and very little hope. And they hung on to those words. And of course, time would pass and they would end up being freed by the Persians. And they would come back eventually to Judah and Jerusalem and to the area again. Not so they could relive it, they couldn't, because Jerusalem may have had the same address, but they certainly didn't look like Jerusalem of old. They may have had deeds that used to say, "I own this property," but new people had come in and said, "That deed's null and void," thanks to the Babylonian army. But they realized God still had something in store for them. I think despite what we see around us, despite what goes on before us, we have to hold on to the hope that God is busy reshaping us for new plans that he has in store for us. And I am going to believe that. And that is what I'm going to anchor both my hope and my ministry and myself in. And I hope you'll join me in that process and journey. We're going to be using this Wednesday time to try to lead you on that process for those of you who come on Wednesday afternoon at 12 and join us. And we're going to be doing that together. And we're going to be offering in person. If you already show up on a Sunday during Sunday school time, we're going to offer in-person meetings. We're going to offer some meetings beyond Sunday mornings. We're going to be offering meetings beyond this time at Wednesday. We'll offer in-person meetings on Wednesday nights beginning on the 22nd of September. We are going to be on a road and on a journey of reshaping in our lives. And if you need more information, message me, text me, write it on here. Be glad to give you everything you need to go on this journey with us in reshaping. So in our prayers, remember this church. Remember yourselves, if you would. Now, some prayer concerns and some instructions. Charles and Ida Lewis have both tested positive for COVID. They were here Sunday in the 9 o'clock service. Now, before anyone begins to panic much, um, the way the guidelines are, it is not so easy to catch without being in extreme close proximity for a period of time. And the result is, by the way, as far as health goes, Charles said to me today, and I quote, as long as you get the license number of the truck that hit me, I'm very happy that you can share our prayer needs. So he's still running a fever and feeling run down. I think Ida is the same. Uh, but I, you know, you decide what you want to do about testing, but I think that if you are not being symptomatic now, there's a good chance you're not going to be. But as a result of this, I think we have to go back to being a little more guarded than we've been. This is through no fault of anybody. Charles and Ida had no idea. They did not exhibit any symptoms until Sunday evening. And then they went and tested first thing on Monday morning on the rapid test and tested positive, and immediately sent word to me. And we've sent word to some people who may have been near them, and they've, I think are feeling okay, and we're doing okay. But here's what we're going to do in worship and in Sunday school starting this Sunday and in the launch event. We're going to distance and space, both in fellowship hall for 9 o'clock worship, in sanctuary for 11 o'clock worship, and we're going to have individual tables for you to be at for the launch event. And we'll give you instruction when you get here. But most of all, in each service and each event, we need you to wear a mask. Now, of course, if you're eating at the launch event, you have to take it off. Our school systems know that. We know that. But what we're going to try to do is still create enough space that you can eat, and then still be a big part of the launch that's coming up. Because we need you. If you signed up, we need you to be here. And by the way, we have 52 people signed up right now. I am so grateful that many people want to invest themselves into reshape for themselves and for this church. So pray, if you would, on those things. Speaking of COVID, my niece, Katie Bailey Register, who has two small children, one which has only been with us, I think, 6 months, something like that, 6-7 months. Long story short, she has COVID. And so my family back home is scrambling to try to help with the two young children and the affairs there. Her husband is trying to keep from getting it. But pray for her. She's very sick, but still at home. My stepfather, Bruce, yesterday, as you know, he has Alzheimer's. He's been in a care facility for almost a year and a half now. And he began to exhibit belligerence yesterday, something he's never done. And so the long and short of it is they took him to the hospital, afraid he may have had a stroke, afraid of a bunch of things. After tests at the hospital yesterday, they've concluded he has a severe UTI and bladder infection. They're treating with IV antibiotics, and I'm very grateful they kept him last night. They may keep him again tonight, which I hope and pray that they do, because if he's there, that's one less concern my mother has about where to go and what to do next. So I ask that you lift all of them up in prayers along the way. Pat McCain. Our Pat McCain is having surgery tomorrow in Greensboro for a total shoulder replacement. So I ask that you pray for her and both the surgery and the recuperation and rehab to be afterwards. And be with Woody as he takes care of her and give him the strength as well. Duck Patterson is having a lot of health issues with his blood pressure. Um, he has not been well. He's been in and out of the ER, and I want you to remember Doc and Vanna in your prayers, please, at this time. Peggy Harris, who had been suffering from shingles, is doing better. Lewis said that the shingles are drying up, and I'm glad to hear that. Charlene Atkins has been dealing with severe stenosis in her hips, and the shot isn't working as it once did. So please remember her. Peggy Martin is still in Stanleytown. I ask that you continue to remember her and hope that maybe soon she'll be able to get to go home. Uh, a lot of needs and prayers. Remember, we need to be precautionary and safe right now, and we're going to do our best on, when you were here for worship, for Sunday school, for launch, for anything that's going on in the upcoming weeks. We're not stepping back from having our events and services yet, but we are stepping back into a safer protocol to wear your masks um, and to distance from people you normally are not around, so that we can do our part in helping control what is becoming once again a very um, pandemic-like time on the COVID. There are tons of people uh, who it seems to me are as many getting it now that I know as back then. So let's lift each other up in prayer. Gracious Lord, we live in challenging times. And I heard someone say today to me that they go to bed fearing what's going on, and they wake up in fear of what is to happen. That's human nature. But Lord, you can give us the strength we need to turn the level of those fears down. We still need to be safe and cautious about COVID, respecting one another, and yet, Lord, at the same time, we need to trust you. Trust that you are with us in this journey. These are uncertain moments. What we looked like 2 years ago, we do not look like now. We most likely will not look like again. That is the turn of the wheel of history, Lord. But the one unchanging factor is you. So, Lord, we beg and plead that you remind us that you are the unchanging, unfazed God in the midst of uncertainty and chaos. And in Jesus' name, we ask for your hands to lift us all up. Amen. Forgot to share with you a moment ago, Matt Fouts is beginning his new type of chemo treatments because they've reclassified his type of cancer. So continue to remember he and Hyla and the family in your prayers. May God bless you in these days and in these journeys that we are upon. And I look forward to worshiping with you on Sunday.